developed by our co-founder Charles Fillmore, and instead of calling them powers, we could just as easily call them core virtues. Folks who might have some background in philosophy might recognize the 12 powers as what they call in philosophy a system of virtue ethics. Together they constitute what Charles Fillmore would have called the Christ, which is his idea of the ultimate human good. So if we want to borrow a line from, anyone remember that old Army commercial from years ago, be all that you can be? If you want to be all that you can be, tap into the 12 powers. Learn how to draw upon the power that's within. So today, we are covering wisdom, understanding, and imagination. Now, a lot of things come to mind when I hear the word wisdom. When we say that a person is wise. That's a good thing, right? Everybody would like to be considered wise, and yet nobody likes a wise guy, right? For example, wise man, wise guy. Although everybody likes Curly, right? Curly was the lovable stooge, but he says, I'm trying to think, but nothing happens. Anyway, so Curly was a wise guy. Words of wisdom inspire us, but a wisecrack is a put down. You can be a wiseacre, a Weisenheimer. You can be a wise, and I know there's another word there that you're probably all thinking about. Again, nobody wants to be one. Nobody likes them. Now I have a rather, some of you know that I have this rather extensive collection of what I call guru cartoons. Guru on the Mountain cartoons. They're cartoons showing this guru up at the top of a mountain, and people risk life and limb to climb up to the top of the mountain and ask the guru to tell them the meaning of life. And I'm not going to inflict my whole collection on you this morning. Here's a couple of recent ones, though, that I think are worth looking at. So here the guy has gotten up there, the guru is sitting there, and his words of wisdom are, don't patronize me, nobody cares what I think anymore, go ask Dr. Phil. And this next one I think is especially contemporary. The two guys are up at the top. There's no guru, there's just an empty blanket. There's a billboard with a guru on the billboard, and it says, get the app. Is there an app for that? So instead of wisdom, they get wisecracks after all that effort. After all that effort. So wisdom. I like to think of wisdom as the power of judgment, discernment, and intuition. It is knowing how and when to apply our faculties of critical thinking in any given situation. And again, I want to show you this illustration. I used this a few weeks back, but I think it's worth repeating. The difference between knowledge and wisdom is this. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, right? Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. So there you go. And that really works. That definition really works, because knowledge is simply information. You can be this vast font of knowledge and you can do some really dumb things with it. When it comes to information, right, think about this, for example. A computer is no match for human beings when it comes to information. A computer can hold more information than any one of us could hope to, but would anyone call their computer wise? Dead silence. No rousing round of approval for their computer. Not exactly wise. Collecting information is great, but it's even better to know what to do with it. We need sound judgment. We need good judgment, which is a core piece of wisdom. And you know what they say about judgment? This is from Mark Twain. He said, good judgment is the result of experience, and experience is the result of bad judgment. Ain't it the truth? So wisdom, a combination of knowledge and judgment, which is the product of experience. We learn from experience what works and what doesn't, and that means that we need to consider ourselves to be students of life. But there's another crucial ingredient we haven't added to the mix yet. We haven't talked about humility. Without humility, we don't learn from our mistakes. We don't learn from our bad judgment. Without humility, we can't even admit to ourselves that we made a mistake. Oh, I was wrong? I don't think so, right? Without humility, we don't learn from our experience. We don't learn that maybe we might need to change our worldview. There's no true wisdom without humility, and I think one of the best illustrations of that principle is a guy named Solomon that we encounter in the Bible, which is interesting because Solomon is always trotted out as the great example of wisdom based on this one short story. And you know the story I'm talking about, right? How he settled a dispute between two women who were claiming to be the mother of the same child. Remember that? Solomon takes out a sword and says, well, I got an easy solution. I'll just cut the child in half and give you each half of it. He knew full well that the real mother would be the first one to renounce her claim. And he wasn't so much wise in that situation as he was clever, right? He had a lot of knowledge about human nature, and he applied that knowledge so as to manipulate the outcome of this situation. And he gets the title of wise man. And the Bible does that a lot. They call Solomon a wise man. They call Job a paragon of patience when he was just the opposite of that. But Solomon gets called a wise man. And nobody ever talks about what happens next in the saga of Solomon. Sure, he does some good things. He goes on this building spree, builds palaces, a fleet of ships, builds the most magnificent temple that the Israelites would ever have. Which brings me to the first joke I ever learned. Where was Solomon's temple located? In the side of his head. See, that really cracked up a 6-year-old. Solomon truly turned Israel into what we would call today a superpower. But he accomplished all of that by abusing his own people. He resorted to forced labor, slavery, and then he held himself to be above the law, especially the law that prohibited Jewish men from marrying foreign women. The legend says that Solomon had something like 1,000 wives, which really says something about how the Bible regards the sanctity of marriage. But apart from that issue, most of his 1,000 wives were foreign women. Jewish men were forbidden to marry foreign women. But he didn't just marry them, he worshipped their foreign gods, which was a real no-no. So eventually what happens in this story, Solomon's story has a really bad ending. The people revolted, which resulted in chaos and civil war. The kingdom split in two, and then it was easy pickings for the neighboring powers. So it was first conquered by the Assyrians, and later the Babylonians. It turns out that Solomon wasn't so wise after all. His leadership led to disaster because he used his knowledge and experience in service to his own massive, bloated ego. Without humility, we are prone to believe the worst that we're capable of thinking. We start to believe our own BS, as I've heard it said. And that's a problem. And as we can see in the case of Solomon, it's a huge problem when it happens to someone who's supposed to be in that kind of a leadership position. Solomon is a cautionary tale. We learn that true wisdom requires a combination of knowledge, good judgment, experience, and humility. And so then, in order to be able to put those things together, to put that combination together, one of the things that can help us is our next power, which is understanding. So we hear the word understanding, and it's pretty easy to break that down into two parts, right? You can break it down into two words, under and standing. What is it that stands beneath a claim that we're making, or a claim that someone else wants us to believe? What is the foundation on which that claim is based? How do I get reliable information to serve as a foundation for believing that claim and calling it knowledge? Is it a foundation of unproven assumptions, wishful thinking, untested ideas, or is there some real evidence based on observation and experience Is it practical? Have we proven it and demonstrated it to work in real life? Is it something we can test and verify through experience? Understanding wants us to know those things. Understanding wants us to look for those things so we can know what is true and what can be trusted. Our understanding needs to be multifaceted, like a diamond. And what I mean by that is we take information in from a variety of different sources, and then we cross-check it. We also want to be aware that there are some sources of information that are better suited to certain situations. For example, if I wake up in the morning and I'm wondering if I'm going to need a raincoat or a jacket that day, I'm not going to turn within to look for guidance. I'm not likely to rely on intuition when I can simply, open up the window, open up the curtains, open the door, stick my head outside and take a look around and see what's happening. And then after that, I can turn on a weather forecast and find out what's going to be happening later on in the day. Whatever information we acquire, again, it needs to be tested and verified before we can call it knowledge, before we can say that it's true. One study, one news story, one scientific paper isn't enough. We have to keep asking questions. Questions like, is it a reputable source? Is it known for being biased? Has it been reviewed by others? Have they duplicated the results? And so on and so forth. And the reason we want to be careful is because anyone can be fooled. Anyone can be fooled. No matter how educated, anyone can be fooled. Don't just rely on one source of news for information. I hear about a breaking news story just because one organization is calling it breaking news. I want to see who else is picking it up. Not just the cable news services, not just the 3 networks. What about the wire services that are out there? Associated Press, UPI, and things like that. And if it's an international story, if it has some world significance, what about taking a look at what the BBC is reporting? Reuters, Der Spiegel, even Al Jazeera. What are the foreign press outlets reporting about this story? It's amazing the different perspectives that you take. And you may think that this takes a long time. Oh, I don't have time to do all that. It takes about 5 minutes to scroll from one to the next and just to check it out and see what's happening. That's what it takes. If we're not willing to do something like that, when we're being handed a claim that people want us to believe, if we're not willing to do something like that, we're just giving our power away. Understanding wants us to take that multifaceted approach. So that brings us to our final power for today. Imagination. Okay, look up imagination in the dictionary, and you get this simple definition: the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts of external objects not present to the senses. The ability of the mind to be creative or resourceful. Think about this. Where would we be without the power of imagination? Our human ancestors millions of years ago would never have invented tools or any of the other things that have proven to be essential to our survival and really our thriving as a species on this planet. Imagination was essential to all of that. Now, we don't need things like stories and art in order to survive, but what would life be like without the arts, without stories? No imagination. No imagination means no stories, no art, no literature, no music, no Hollywood, no television, no Broadway, no architecture. None of that would exist without imagination. We would literally still be hiding in caves if we lacked imagination. And it was imagination that allowed us to visualize how we could take natural materials and construct shelter and make tools and all the other things that make life go so much better for us. And creativity, which is a big part of imagination, creativity is a 100% natural process. Sometimes I know we hear people say, oh, well, I don't have much of an imagination. I'm not very creative, which is impossible. It's 100% natural because we're a part of the creative imperative of the universe. It's the nature of the universe to expand, to create, to combine things in new ways. We're a part of that universe, so we share the same nature. There's nothing we can do to get more creativity. All we can do is to exercise as much as possible the creativity that we already have. Our job is to remove the barriers and to stop talking like that I'm not creative, I don't have a good imagination. A very creative person, an artist, a scientist, a philosopher, a guy by the name of Walter Russell once said that, he said, "The universe does not bestow favors on the few whom it seeks out as interpreters. It is just the reverse. The universe gives to those who plug in. Mediocrity is self-inflicted and genius is self-bestowed." You know, people call Albert Einstein a genius. And we usually think that his genius is more closely associated with the power of understanding that we talked about earlier. And again, understanding is that power that deals with observation, reason, intellect, logic, analysis, and things like that. I think a great argument can be made that Einstein's greatest power, greatest gift, was imagination, which he then combined with understanding. In his own autobiography, Einstein talks about one of his favorite activities when he was young. He called them thought experiments. So instead of doing something in a lab, he would imagine the experiment in his mind. Now, some people might call it daydreaming, right? But so what? I mean, look at what can happen. Einstein talks about this landmark thought experiment that he did when he was 16 years old. And incidentally, there's this story going around that Einstein was a poor student, but that's not exactly true. He had no patience for the kind of rote and repetitive memorization that so often passes as education, but he was truly intelligent. He did well in school. He preferred visualization. When Einstein finally found a school in Switzerland that encouraged students to visualize, well, that's when things started really taking off for him. So Einstein did this. He tried to imagine what it would be like to travel so fast that you caught up with a light beam. What if I could ride a beam of light across the universe, he thought. So he used his imagination. What would it be like to ride on a beam of light? What would happen to our concept of time? This daydreaming, let's go ahead and call it daydreaming. So what? This daydreaming led to his special theory of relativity, which led to this famous equation, which also led to this. Powerful. Powerful. Not just that, nuclear power, but that's a good illustration of what the power of imagination can do, especially when it's combined with understanding. They all work together, and this bit of imagination, this bit of daydreaming, literally changed the world. Now, imagination plays another very important role in our day-to-day lives, because imagination is one of the reasons why human beings can have empathy and compassion. Think about it this way. We have to be able to put ourselves in another person's shoes, so to speak, in order to have compassion, in order to have empathy, or even sympathy. And if we're going to put ourselves in another person's shoes, it requires imagination. We have to be able to imagine what a situation might be like for someone else, and then by extension realize that, hey, they're experiencing the same thing that I experience. We're all in the same boat together. I have an idea of what that person is going through, and that indeed is the foundation for empathy and compassion. So imagination serves many, many important roles in our lives and in this world that we've shaped today. What would life be without imagination? I wouldn't even want to imagine it. And that's all for today, so stay tuned. Until next week, we're going to cover the powers of will, order, and zeal. See you then.